Assistant Professor. I am going to discuss about motor learning. First we'll see what is motor learning. Motor learning is a study of acquisition and or modification of a movement. So all the human movements are performed through our motor learning process only. So that comes under the acquisition, which means understanding of the movement, where it comes from and what are the sources which are giving you the movement. So the next is the motor control was focusing on the control of the movement. But in the motor learning, which is completely relies on the understanding of the acquisition and the modification of the movement. Once the movement has acquired, so we have to modify the movement. So according to the need which we are having to perform in the environment, according to the need of the tasks which we have to accomplish, the motor learning will differ. So that is the basic concept of the motor learning. So coming to the definition. So motor learning is a set of processes which is associated with the practice and experience. So in motor learning, there is a two unique words which we have to remember. So that is practice and experience. All the movements we have to practice in our day-to-day life so that we can master that skill. And through the experience also we can learn more and we can master all the modifications of the movement. So that is the definition. So what will be the change when we do this practice and experience? So that is relatively permanent changes in the capability of producing skilled actions. So as I said, the practice and experience will give you a skillful movement. So that skillful movement will give you a relatively permanent change in your movement. So that is the definition of the motor learning. So what are the four basic concepts of the motor learning? So these practice, experience and the skillful action acquisition are all based on these four concepts of the motor learning. So the first concept is acquiring the capability of skillful action. So as I said, acquiring the capability of skillful action comes through the practice only. So the next concept results from experience or practice. As we stated in the previous definition, so the same thing is repeated in the second concept, that is experience or the practice. So the third one, which cannot be measured directly, instead it can be inferred from the behavior. So motor learning cannot be measured directly from someone's performance or someone's performance of the movement. So other than that, we can infer that from the behavior. We can ask the movement to do and we can observe how the movement is performed and we can measure what is the achievement which got through practice or experience of the motor learning. So the fourth concept is the learning produces relatively permanent changes in the behavior. So there will be a relatively permanent change in how to do the movement and where to do the movement and in which degree we have to do the movement. All those things will be mastered with the help of the practice and the experience. So these four concepts comes from the definition. So the definition is completely focused on the concept of practice, experience and which will lead to a permanent change in our skillful action. So this is what the basic concept of the motor learning. So the next is what are the different forms of learning? How a human can learn some movements or some characteristics from the environment or from the help of the tasks. So that was classified in the forms. So basically there are two forms of learning. The one is non-associative form of learning. The other one is associative form of learning. So non-associative form of learning. Let's discuss about that. So it occurs when a single stimulus is given repeatedly. If you want to perform a purposeful movement, so you have to give a stimulus which will give you that purposeful movement. So that's also repeatedly you have to give that stimulus. So repeatedly given stimulus will give you a learning. So that is the non-associative form of the learning. Thus the nervous system learns about the characteristics of the stimulus. So once we are adapted to that stimulus, the nervous system, which is brain, that will learn about what are the characteristics of that stimulus. So that will give you an adaptation to that stimulus. So the two forms of this non-associative form of If you are giving a repeated exposure of the stimulus to a single movement, so that will give you a habituation. That will give you a decrease in the response. So that is the habituation. Next is the sensitization. So increased responsiveness to a particular stimulus which is threatened or which is noxious to a person. So that is sensitization. That will affect the habituation. So the next form is associative form. So associative form of learning will give you an association of the ideas. So the ideas will be associated together. So that will give you to predict a relationship. So what are the two types of associative form of learning? Is classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So classical conditioning consists of learning a pair of two different stimuli. So we can learn the two different stimulus. So the next is the operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is basically a trial and error method. We can give a try and we can expect the result as a success or a failure. So through the success we can learn, and through the failure we can able to relearn how to do the movement properly. So that is the operant conditioning. The next is the procedural and declarative learning. So the procedural learning and declarative learning is a form of associative learning. So the procedural learning is the learning the task that can be performed without attention or the conscious thought, which is like throughout the practice we can be an expert in that moment. So that is the procedural learning. So the next is declarative learning. It results in the knowledge that can be consciously recalled, and we have to pay more attention to the declarative learning. So these are the forms of the learning. So which is basically of two types, associative form and non-associative.